Welcome once again to Cinemaholics, the major motion podcast, where we talk about the biggest and best films coming to theaters and streaming online. From the San Francisco Bay Area, I am John Negroni, film editor for InBetweenDrafts.com. And from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, he is a freelance film writer, and he's got a new novel he's working on. I hope it doesn't get him killed. It's Will Ashton.
No, I do have to admire... this is like in the span of 5 years... This character wrote like 5 books.
Yeah, book a year.
Yeah, I mean, is that?
But I mean, based on the word, like the way those books are written, though, I mean, I kind of get it.
Sure, yeah. I was always kind of curious when like people, the other characters are inflating her ego a little bit. It's like, you're a hell of a writer, just kind of. It's a weird balance because I don't want to get ahead too early, but like, I kind of took the beginning of the movie to be like kind of tongue in cheek and like a parody of the sort of. Like, airport throwaway sort of novels. But then in the movie, she's supposed to be kind of like acclaimed for her writing. So I was a little confused
airport
about that.
Novelists kind of acclaimed, though, by their little bubbles? That's been my experience in the publishing industry.
Well, I mean...
What you're saying is this movie doesn't have that person who comes in who's just like, your book stinks.
I just don't really know if I fully understood the intent of the beginning of the film. Is what I'm trying to say.
The broader question, imagine somebody like Malcolm Gladwell, right?
Sure.
Like, these folks are, like, if you read any of their stuff, you're like, wow, this is terrible. But they have a ton of fans. And people are just like, wow, because when you come face to face with a celebrity, even a celebrity like at that level, who is like maybe not face recognition, but it's like, you know them for their work, you could still be a little starstruck. I think that's pretty normal, isn't it?
I haven't read any of Gladwell's books, and I feel like we're already veering off the topic of Argyle, but the vibe I kind of got from his books is that like he takes kind of, I don't know, like philosophical, like, like freshman year philosophy sort of questions and kind of taps them down into something that is approachable to, anyone probably like 14 years or older. And so like because of that, people who, I'm not going to say anything about Gladwell's fans because like I said, I haven't read his books or anything, but I just kind of got the vibe that, like, because he's able to do things in a fairly uncomplicated but approachable sort of way, that's the key to his success. Is that unfair to say?
So based on what I've read, he is somebody who, to me, it's not that he simplifies complicated things. It's that he uses the wrong data to say the wrong things wrongly. He's like kind of famous for like, you need to practice 10,000 hours to learn to be a master at something. And there are just countless problems with that conclusion he arrived at. And like the data that he used to get to that point has been like readily disproven over and over again. And so it's like, to me, it's not even that he's trying to present, he tries to find like a scintillating hook for things. I haven't read all of his books, but I'm not a fan of Malcolm Gladwell. Personally, I'm sure he's probably a hoot and a half, but
I mean, like that seems to be, I don't know. I have heard that expression, but it seems like there's a small nugget of truth in there, which is like, if you do something long enough, you'll probably get pretty good at it. And like, he just tried to come up with some phony baloney statistics to have that make scientific sense. And that was wrong.
He tried to put like a framework around it, but
is that what, is that kind of the gist of it?
A little bit. And I'm sure people, when they tapped the Argyle review, Cinemaholics podcast, they're like, they better start off with some Malcolm Gladwell tea spilling, because otherwise, how else can you properly discuss a Matthew Vaughn movie? But we're talking about Argyle, which this is the latest Matthew Vaughn flick. Matthew Vaughn, well known for plenty of films. He used to be the producer on a couple of Guy Ritchie films, and then he went on to direct X-Men First Class. Well, sorry, his first movie was Layer Cake, and he did Stardust and Kick-Ass. Like he did movies before X-Men First Class. But I guess like aside from Kick-Ass, which I think it did get like plenty of attention, I think X-Men First Class is like kind of what broke him into, I'm not going to say the mainstream, but brought more awareness to the guy as a director. Or do you think it was Kick-Ass bigger than I remember?
No, yeah, Kick-Ass was pretty big, at least in like, when I was a teenager in like those kind of circles. I mean, it had a pretty big, I can't say Aaron Taylor Johnson is like, a superstar at this point, but I feel like it did kind of pave the way for him having like a little bit of a like leading man surgeons and stuff like Godzilla. But for me, the big thing I remember about that movie, outside of kind of announcing Vaughn, is like being this sort of colorful, poppy, not given a fu, you know what,
especially after
about
Stardust.
Stuff. Well, not only that, but it's like the 1-2 punch of like that and like Watchmen the year before was kind of like, okay, now comic book movies are evolving. Like we had Iron Man and The Dark Knight in 2008, and it's like they're kind of becoming more accessible to a broader audience and to a more adult audience. The irony, of course, is that Kick-Ass is a very immature and gleefully like juvenile kind of film, but a lot more coarse and violent and extreme than like comic book movies outside of like Blade and a few other examples could be at that time.
Yeah, I like to cite Kick-Ass as like the correct predecessor to The Boys, which, I mean, also based on a comic, but that just sort of tongue-in-cheek, like, hey, let's do the superhero thing, but let's actually say something about it.
But I feel like the big thing about Kick-Ass was that, I mean, it started Chloe Grace Moretz's like film career, I feel like.
Oh, yeah.
Like, I mean, she was in like
she was in other stuff, but I mean, that just kind of blew her up as a hit girl. Yeah.
Yeah. And then it also kind of, I feel like, gradually paved the way for like the Nicolas Cage resurgence. Because I remember at the time, like people were kind of waning him off at that point. Like they were kind of,
he was doing kind of weird movies at the time that like nobody was watching. I think Sorcerer's Apprentice was like a year later.
Right. But like I just feel like, I mean, obviously like in the 2010s, like he would have a lot of like Redbox kind of movies because he had a lot of bills to pay. But like I remember that movie being a common talking point of like, oh, he can still act because like this movie is like, it's ironic, but also like very sort of earnest and like emotional performance from him. And I think, broadly speaking, though, it's more about Matthew Vaughn, I think, being at the right place in the right time, which is there was a sensibility in the 2010s of being kind of, like it's like the rise of like Reddit and like this sort of idea of like the audience, I think maybe not wanting something that was, like playing to all the cliches and playing. Yeah,
it was the fans of the Spider-Man movies, the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies, and the X-Men movies being like, okay, well, let's try something else. Like, let's go for a different vibe, something that gets rid of that earnestness. Yeah. People liked The Dark Knight, but they wanted a little bit more edge, but they didn't want to lose the whole action comedy of it all. And to be clear, Vaughn is somebody who I think is not an action comedy director. He's a comedy action director, if that's fair to say.
Sure, yeah. I think that's fair. I mean, because of his association with Guy Ritchie, I think people kind of put the emphasis on the action. But, I mean, 2010, I just feel like, it's weird to think about it now, but, like, I just feel like it was, like, the rise of, like, sort of, like, Ain't It Cool kind of movies, like Ain't It Cool News stuff, where it's, like, that and Scott Pilgrim were, like, becoming, like, it was, like, the rise of, like, internet kind of films. Like, films that, I think like something like Snakes on a Plane kind of jumped the gun as far as like, oh, people are talking about it online, so therefore there's an audience for it. But there was a sort of growing like organic set of word of mouth, I think, that something like Kick-Ass, I think, really benefited from. Like,
it was still the early days of Twitter and Facebook and Reddit, like you said. And I remember these days because both of us were like coming of age around this time. I'm in college. I worked at a movie theater when Stardust, Kick-Ass, and X-Men First Class all came out. Although I think First Class came out right after I left the movie theater. So I saw all three of Vaughn's movies kind of hit.
I mean, I do think Stardust is good, but I don't think it seems like an outliner in his career because it's a little bit more, it's more like Princess Bride kind of. And it's like, I don't feel like people associate, like I think when people think of Matthew Vaughn, they think of a certain type of film. And I feel like Stardust is the type of movie that when you remind someone that he directed it, kind of similar to X-Men First Class, you're kind of like, oh yeah, like that was him, wasn't it?
I mean, not me necessarily. I think when I think Vaughn, I definitely think First Class. But in terms of Stardust, I remember people associate that movie more with Neil Gaiman. That's based on his work, and there was that like existing fan base. But I guess that's like my broader point. I think he takes these things that are based on other things early in his career. So Stardust and Kick-Ass and X-Men, I mean, they already have existing like source material. In X-Men's case, he was jumping into a franchise. And then, and with X-Men First Class, I don't think arguably, I think it's a fact that he saved the X-Men movies, like so that they could have at least one more decent one before like 3 or 4 terrible ones after that. But yeah, I think that like with First Class, that's kind of what put him on the map in terms of like, okay, like we knew this guy could make, an entertaining movie. Kick-Ass was entertaining, and Kick-Ass was definitely a hit for what it was. It, like we said, launched Chloe Moretz's career, and Aaron Taylor Johnson started getting more steady work after that, and whatever. with X-Men First Class, that was a huge hit. And it was like the first good X-Men movie since X2. I think after, so X3 and X-Men Origins Wolverine were both like pretty disappointing. People were like, it's kind of over, but we still have to make these movies because Spider-Man 2 made all this money. Dark Knight, Iron Man, like superhero movies are making all this money. And Fox was like, we don't want to be left in the lurch. And Fantastic Four, we'll make money with that in 2015. I'm sure they were saying. But no, yeah, I think Vaughn kind of like earned his stripes with that movie. And the interesting thing with First Class is that First Class was kind of like, hey, let's take the X-Men, like the superhero stuff, and make it kind of like have a spy edge to it. Let's have a little bit of espionage. And you could tell that from this point on, like Vaughn was like, I like spy stuff. I like spy things. And I'm going to keep doing that. Because then he starts doing the Kingsman movies. And Kingsman, the Secret Service, just a few years later, that was when he started to be like, I want to start to like create my own kind of also based on a comic book, by the way, so it wasn't his own thing. But I think Mark Millar also did Kick Ass, I want to say, too.
Yeah, I mean, that was kind of the thing, right? Is that like,
yeah,
I feel like he was kind of returning to the basics of Kick Ass. Not that I feel like he veered too far with X-Men First Class, but it just kind of seemed like, to me, like the 1-2 punch of Kick Ass and Kingsman was kind of like what defined Matthew Vaughn. I do agree that, like, as far as his career profile, that something like X-Men First Class certainly was a big stepping stone. But I feel like I just don't associate that particular film as much with his filmography. But I can see why you do. And I do like that movie. I think it's actually one of his better ones, to be fair. But yeah, I think with Kingsman and then the second one and eventually the prequel, I feel like that's like the first movie was where, again, it was like the 2010s. And even though that was like, 2014, like it just felt like
yeah,
people were really into that sort of thing. I remember having a great time when I watched that at the theater. You know,
it's my personal favorite of his filmography. I mean, Kingsman Secret Service, I can still rewatch it. It doesn't age super well in certain respects, as you and I have talked about before. But I think it's his cleanest movie, not in every way, but it just in terms of like sense of identity. I think it's exactly the movie he wanted to make. I think it's the best action he's ever put together in a movie. It's just more complete. Mm-hmm. And I think like Golden Circle's like more of it. And so I certainly appreciate it because like I like Kingsman. And I was like, there's more of this, please. But I think it left a kind of like, I don't know, like people weren't satiated by Golden Circle. They were like, you know, what the first Kingsman did was it was like, let's take the Bond stuff and parody it, but let's parody it in a way that it hasn't been parodied before, because people have been parodying the sort of like Sean Connery, Roger Moore, even Pierce Brosnan style James Bond for ages. Mm-hmm. At that time, we were still getting Daniel Craig Bond movies like readily, but this was sort of like, we're going to do that, but we're going to have a lot of comedy and we're going to have a lot of action, to the point where people can, I think, reasonably disagree over, is this action comedy or comedy action? I lean more toward comedy action because I don't think there's enough seriousness in this movie to say that it's action comedy, but I can see the argument, you know. I just don't think Matthew Vaughn likes to make action comedies, but this may be his closest.
Well, I mean, I think it's fair to say that is sort of like a parody of the Bond genre, but it did kind of feel like a reprieve of like the Roger Moore 80s era of Bond, where just, you know, it was kind of like throwing the kitchen sink out sort of thing, where just like, you know, a ton of weird stuff, like, you know, cars or boats that became cars, and like Moonraker and all this. Oh wait, no, sorry, Moonraker is Connery, but what's the one? I can't think of it. I don't know. I just know that
His Majesty's Secrets. No. Are you thinking of? Hold on, let me think of. Roger Moore is not my favorite Bond.
I actually have a very soft spot for Roger Moore as Bond. I don't think he has the best Bond films, but I think he's one of the best Bond actors, if that makes sense.
Octopussy?
Yeah, I think I was thinking of Octopussy, to be fair. But, you know, it just kind of felt like
he did do Moonraker. You were right.
Oh, it was right? Okay, cool.
I was wondering too, because I was like, is that really Roger Moore? But okay.
Any case. But, I mean, it just felt like good counter-programming, I guess, to the dour, you know, like post 9/11 Craig Bond films that are just very dour and serious, and it's like we can't have fun. Yeah, I mean, yeah, some of them were.
Casino Royale.
But yeah, I mean, I think it was a little bit more than that. I think it was just sort of like, you know, I until Skyfall sort of changed things around, I feel like people treated Kingsman like the next Bond because of how mixed they were with like Quantum of Solace, and they weren't 100% sure like if the Craig Bond was going to work out, if it was just kind of like a fluke sort of thing. But
I never got the vibe that people were like, oh, this is this is the next Bond. To me, people just got like, oh, this is what a spy action movie can be. Like, people were liking the balance of the tones here, because it was just one of those kinds of movies that, like, I don't know, it had enough action so that you could be like, this is comic book ish. Like, this is kind of like straddling that line. It's like First Class, but like more comedy, and the action is definitely more grounded, but it's still stylized, and it's doing all the spy stuff at the forefront. It's got its own lore, its own mythology, Michael Caine of it all. And yeah, I think that it was just different enough at the time that people were like, oh, this is like a new, I saw it being like, this is a new kind of thing of what we've gotten before, rather than, oh, this is ushering a new era of the same thing, I guess, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly wouldn't say Kingsman is a grounded film in any respect, but I get what you're alluding to.
I was just comparing it to like the superpower stuff, like the action is grounded in the sense that like people can't, they're not mutants,
sure,
but like they can do still like very comic booky things, like slice people with their legs.
Yeah, but yeah, I do agree in the sense that like it did feel like the most like Vaughn-esque, and especially because like I feel like, I don't know if it was maybe a coincidence that he dressed kind of more like the Kingsman characters, but I kind of get the vibe that like kind of similar, like Wes Anderson looks and dresses like a character in a Wes Anderson movie, and Tim Burton looks and dresses like a character in a Tim Burton movie. I feel like now like Matthew Vaughn just looks and dresses like a Kingsman, and I feel like that's just kind of his weird warped perception of like what like the movie should be, which is, fine in its own right. But I agree that like Golden Circle, I like we mentioned this before already, but like I think you were kinder to it than I just had mixed feelings about it. I just felt like I admire the ambition. I admire the gumption of it. I think it was just a little bloated and a little like messy in its approach. It didn't really feel as like sure-footed, I think, as the first Kingsman movie.
I do think that movie does kind of reek of production issues, which I'm not totally sure if that actually was the case.
Maybe. I do think, though, there's something to be said about his working with these sort of bombastic comic book movies probably did warp his perception of like how to like play up stakes and tone. And I think that's part of the reason why his most recent films, like I said, I haven't seen the most recent Kingsman movie, the third one, but it did seem like some of the problems from Argyle sort of derive from like maybe him learning the wrong lessons from why people responded to Kingsman and Kick-Ass.
I'm glad you touched on this, because I think that Golden Circle and Argyle kind of have the same issue, where they clearly seem to be, they're not as standalone as they should be by the time you get to the end of it. In the sense of Golden Circle, the issue there was like they killed off a character who clearly it was like unceremonious, and it was like, well, she's probably survived, but they never talk about her again. So like maybe she's gonna. You just get the sense of like he had a plan for like a third movie, but then maybe they figured out along the way that they weren't gonna do a third movie. So you still have this like awkward sort of, I don't know, just the Golden Circle issue. I think was the villain was a little bit too stupid, and I think they just kind of lost the plot with the America stuff. And I think they kind of maybe changed some things at the last second, because they're like, oh, we're not going to do a third movie. We're going to do a prequel. I don't know if that's true at all. They might have just I don't remember if the box office was even bad. I mean, actually, no, it didn't have bad box office, 410 million.
I mean,
but maybe along the way, he was like, I don't want to make this a trilogy. I want to do this prequel or whatever.
Right. I think it was more that latter thing. I just seem, because they got a third movie. So like, I feel like it had to do at least decent business.
I think the way that I am seeing Matthew Vaughn kind of percolate with all this stuff is I think that he wanted to sort of buck the trend of doing a trilogy and start to craft these spin-offs and do all these different things. That's how we get to Argyle, which, not the biggest spoiler in the world that Argyle is in the Kingsman universe. They kind of treat it as a big deal, but I think by the time you get to the end of the movie, most people watching are going to be like, okay. Like it's not it's not like the end of Iron Man being like, oh, there's going to be more,
Sure.
Marvel characters in this.
I was going to kind of treat that as a spoiler, but if that's off the table, I was going to say when I saw the movie, I saw it during like a weekday screen. I didn't see it like at a press screen or anything like you did. So it was just, kind of Joe Schmo's types. And it was just really funny to me because when that came about, there's maybe about like 8 other people in the theater. Most of the people like me were just sort of just like indifferent to that reveal. But there was a guy in the way front who was just like, what?
I wish I had seen it with an audience. I saw it at a press screening, and it was a midday one. So like, there was just like, oh no, it wasn't midday. It was at night. But like, there weren't that many people in the audience.
Well, I feel like our audiences were probably pretty similar then, because it was just like, I saw like an evening screening.
Just quiet.
The audience it was just kind of just quiet. Like no one really like were react, like in a good or bad way. It just was like people were like there was maybe one guy behind me who had chuckled a couple times. I might have like chuckled once.
I chuckled toward the beginning of the film. I don't think I chuckled at all afterward. But before we get to that, I think the finer point that I wanted to land on is that I think that he wants to set up a Kingsman 3. I do think he wants to bring back Colin Firth and Taron Egerton and a few other characters who I guess are still alive from that universe. I bet they're kicking themselves for killing off Pedro Pascal. I think they killed off Pedro Pascal. I don't actually remember in Golden Circle. Because he was still like, he wasn't as like, dad of the internet as he is, or like hot dad uncle of the internet like he is today. You look at me quizzically, but do you know of like the Pedro Pascal, like,
I know,
obsessed fan? Okay. I was going to say, I was like, I don't
like
want to.
Everyone's resident gunkle, I think is what I've heard him called as.
He's the problem is he's a little overexposed, which is risky, but he has the charisma to weather it for now, I think. But
I don't know. I mean, especially considering another film we're going to be talking about in a couple weeks, I'm kind of at the point where I'm like, is he charismatic or is he a good actor? Like, I'm not 100% sure. Like,
I would say both. I've seen enough good stuff from the guy that I think he's quite a good actor. I think Last of Us definitely cemented that for a lot of other people who were maybe on the fence, but
you
didn't see that.
Maybe that,
He's very, very good in Last of Us, and there were high expectations forced on him. But anyway, he's not in this movie.
Sure.
But no, I bring that up because I think the only stuff that has to do with Kingsman in the movie, that's why I don't consider it a spoiler. It doesn't have anything to do with the movie itself. It's sort of tacked on as like, oh yeah, so okay, the Kingsman thing is also in this universe, and we kind of are setting up another kind of like thing. I'm just going to give it away. So if you don't want to know, I'm going to give it away now. I don't think it's a big deal. I don't think the movie is even going to happen based on the box office returns of Argyle, but basically they're setting up like what looks to be like an 80s 90s Kingsman movie that's going to feature an Argyle-esque character, but different. And I don't know. I think Vaughn just kind of wanted to do his own Marvel Cinematic Universe, Ashton. Is that fair to say? That's what he wanted to do. And I think,
well, yeah. I mean, he wants the MVCU, I guess, the Matthew Vaughn Cinematic Universe.
Yes, I was gonna say, because it's not really the like, because Argyle is not 20th Century Fox, right?
Sure.
So this is Apple Original Films and Universal Pictures.
Yeah.
So and full disclosure, as usual, I do work for Apple, but I do not work for Apple TV, and I have nothing to do with this stuff.
But yeah, I mean, that does. I do want to. I have a lot of points to say about that whole thing. But I don't want to jump ahead because it seems like you're going to be introducing the film, so I'll let you do that now.
Sure, I would love to introduce the film. It's about time we did. We're about 23 minutes in. So, as we mentioned, this is Matthew Vaughn, but he did not write the movie. And it's interesting. He writes most of his movies. The last time he didn't write a movie was Layer Cake. So he writes virtually all of them, and I think about it. But yeah, this is the first time in his career he hasn't directed one, or written and directed, since his first film. Instead, he had Jason Fuchs. You remember Jason Fuchs? Well, Ashton, you know this guy? You know what he's done to me?
No. Was he an actor before he was a writer?
So, yes, he has appeared in certain films such as Flipper, Mafia, The Hebrew Hammer.
Okay, maybe...
he has like a small role in La La Land, and his last acting role was It Chapter 2.
Okay.
These are all kind of like bit roles. Not really.
Gotcha.
But
okay.
As a screenwriter, or I should say he has done TV stuff too. I kind of skipped over that, but he was in The Sopranos. He played Junior.
Hey, Gabagool. Wait, you say he was Junior?
Junior Sontag?
Oh, okay. I was going to say.
Yeah, not that guy. Oh, I see. I was like, what? But yeah, no, so Jason Fuchs, is a screenwriter. Here are the movies he has written that he's done: Ice Age, Continental Drift, Pan, and I Still See You. Now, I Still See You, I've never even heard of this movie. It's a Bella Thorne movie, so I think we can leave it at that. He has a story credited on Wonder Woman. That's it.
The first
and
one?
then Pan, which, I mean, God help us.
He helped write the first Wonder Woman or Wonder Woman 1984?
Wonder Woman 2017.
Okay.
So the first one. I just have a question, Ashton, because Matthew Vaughn, he's made some films that have made great box office. X-Men First Class, Kingsman, Golden Circle, as we just established. The Kingsman didn't do super well, but I think people kind of give Matthew Vaughn a pass for that because of like COVID stuff and, you know, and also Kingsman, you said you didn't see it. It made 126 million at the box office. I kind of respect the movie for what it is, but it is kind of stupid. It has one good scene with like Rasputin. The rest of it's a bit of a slog. Otherwise, like, it's not the biggest miss. And also, it's hard not to love Ray Fiennes in anything, for me at least. How did Jason Fuchs get this job? Like, how does he get his hands on this movie? I do not understand Hollywood, because there are so many talented screenwriters, and they turn to somebody who has never like turned in a script. Like, are we gonna say Ice Age Continental Drift is his best movie? I'm about to.
I kind of get the vibe. I don't know. When stuff like this happens, I feel like what happens is that they write like a really strong like blacklist script that like kind of like gets into development hell, but it's like enough to give him jobs in other movies. I don't know if that's the case with this dude, or if that's, you know, if he just kind of worked his way through the ladder, however so. But I do know that this is based on a book or a series of books as well, also named Argyle.
Yes, but that was also sort of part of Matthew Vaughn's sort of like, it was all kind of concocted by Vaughn. So to me, this is like a screenwriter for hire type situation, because Vaughn himself, like, he wanted to license another author to write the books and to tie the books in with the movies and to make a whole Argyle series that would like cross media platforms. That was the idea. And that's why he started working on this as early as like 2021 when The Kingsman came out, right? So that was the plan, but they couldn't make it happen in certain ways, but they did have like somebody ghost write the book, so that there is a book called Argyle written by Ellie Conway. Haven't read it, but there's not a real Ellie Conway. In the movie, Ellie Conway is a character played by Bryce Dallas Howard. I think the idea that Vaughn was going for was like people like John Negroni, who love stupid fan theories and love these like meta things. They're going to eat this up. Guys like Johnny N. I'm like, Matthew Vaughn, it is not 2013 anymore. We moved on. Like, this kind of stuff is just exhausting now. Like, there's too many streaming services, Will Ashton. I can't keep up with media anymore. It's a me thing.
Well, no. I think that kind of gets into what I think is fascinating about the film, is that it feels like everything is trying
so hard.
Everything. Well, I mean, yes. I mean, it's a Matthew Vaughn film, but it's trying too hard, but it's also being ironic and cheeky about it. But no, I think it's more like you said, like it's trying to like introduce the cinematic universe. It's continuing the sort of sensibility of Matthew Vaughn popularized in the 2010s, and it's going for, you know, like you said, like a cross media kind of thing that was probably very kitsch and very popular if it had been done in like 2016 or 2017, but everything about it kind of feels like, you know, it's kind of past its sell date at this point. Like, it's kind of getting into this too late when people are kind of more, I mean, I can't speak broadly, but now that the superhero genre is kind of more in state of flux than it's been probably in half my lifetime, you know, since like 2008. You know, now that like the idea of like cinematic universes are, you know, not dead, but I feel like people are kind of more inclined to like see movies that are like, I don't know, like Oppenheimer or like Barbie, where it's like a little bit more like new but different. Like it's like the idea of like,
sell me on a good pitch, a good premise. Not the premise is that it's a continuation of something else you already recognize.
Sorry, I meant to say familiar but different, not new but different. But
sure.
But yeah, basically, I feel like this whole concept, we kind of joked already that it's very similar to The Lost City from a few years ago, but it just feels like a very 90s kind of script. Like, in its core, like the idea of like a spy novelist actually gets into like a spy kind of scenario, and it has like kind of the plot mechanics of like kind of like a star driven film that like someone like, you know, Cameron Diaz and like Tom Cruise would be in like 1996.
Well, let me properly set it up. So the story, as you've just alluded, the movie starts with a scene from the book. And unless you've watched a trailer, you wouldn't know, right? So we see Henry Cavill, and your first clue that like something's off here is that his haircut is a nightmare. I loved it. I hope he keeps it. And he's kind of just dressed as like a Japanese high schooler with like the jumpsuit and the buttons. And well, I know you don't watch like anime or anything, but I think which surprised me considering you're wearing a t-shirt with like the picture of like a Shih Tzu on it. So I'm like, that's the most anime kind of shirt I've ever seen, but bar having actual anime on it. But anyway, we see him kind of going on this like typical, like kind of a heightened James Bond movie, very Roger Moore, very Pierce Brosnan with like the suave charisma. And he goes up to Dua Lipa, who plays this femme fatale. And then they kind of have this chase scene that's kind of like a Mission Impossible movie where it's like stupid and like the physics don't make sense, but it's supposed to be kind of thrilling or whatever. And then John Cena is in a Hawaiian shirt and he has a one-liner. And you're like, okay, so like this is clearly something. This is the part of the movie where I'm laughing because I'm like, this is kind of fun because it's bad at being a parody, but that almost feels like, at least I feel like I'm in on the joke or something. And then it cuts to Bryce Dallas Howard as the author of the book, and she's reading it at a book signing, the most well-attended book signing I've ever seen. But regardless, the idea of people standing up and asking questions had me dying, like laughing at the movie. Well, oh my God.
That's where it kind of felt like, okay, this is where we're getting to like 1995 territory.
Yes.
Like this where it's like, okay, you know, because I feel like, I don't know, not to tie us into a totally different film, but like American Fiction, you know, is another film that I feel like.
Yeah, same vibe.
It has a very earnest but outdated sentimentality as far as the publishing industry, where it's like, I don't want to be like, no, this is wrong, because I would like to believe this is what the publishing industry can be like. But like, I live in 2024 and I recognize that this is a very idealistic and outdated perception of what, you know, the book industry is like.
Just the idea. Just the idea of like a spy thriller like this isn't like the spy books, the popular ones. They're not like this at all. Like they are this sort of like comic booky, pulpy sort of like I've got my sidekicks. Not really. They're more like the ones I think of are like Jack Reacher. They're a little bit more brooding. They're a little bit more serious, and they're about something, man. You know what I mean? Like even like what's his face? I keep thinking like James Maxwell.
You talking about James Patterson?
Patterson, that's what I was thinking of. Malcolm Gladwell, and everything was messed up.
Yeah, no, the thought that did cross my mind, and this is a movie I'll probably never be made, but I think would be 10 times more entertaining, at least to me, is the idea of like a middle-aged or senior citizen guy like James Patterson being forced into a sort of like James Patterson like story. Which obviously is not spy related, but it's like a murder mystery. I guess that's what basically like Only Murderers in the Building is. I don't know. I haven't watched that show, but
I haven't seen that either.
But I think that would be a more entertaining kind of knock at this premise than something like this, which I think is well meaning, but just like I said, just kind of feels touch in two different ways. Like not only in the sense of like it's out of touch in the sense of like this kind of feels like an outdated premise as far as like, you know, kind of a throwback, which can be fun. I'm not dismissing that out of hand. But it feels like the approach is trying to go for like a more contemporary thing, but that contemporary approach is already outdated. Like it feels like it's not attuned to the now. So it feels like, you know, two throwbacks that aren't blending together. They're coming out like 2 to 3 decades late.
Well, to complement what you're saying, eventually Bryce Dallas Howard's character comes into contact with Sam Rockwell's character, and he's actually a spy, and he's like, oh, I'm a big fan of yours, and he has to like protect her because there's this like rogue spy agency that believes that her books are somehow like predicting the future, and he tries to protect her from this like conspiracy thing. There are two problems with this movie that like two I don't know, not the biggest problems, but there's two problems I just want to point out right now. How about that? One, audiences don't want this movie. People don't want a movie like this. I think we are past this. I think movies like Red Notice, the Adam Project. I mean, pick like a Ryan Reynolds kind of action movie, disposable action movie you can watch on Netflix. People have gotten to the point where like, I don't want to watch like a comedic action movie in a movie theater unless it really like is good at the action. Like it's got to have enough of the spectacle to it. Like some of the better Marvel movies, like, okay, I'm going to get like a very interesting sort of like world or something. But even then, movies like the Marvels, Marvels wasn't successful. And I just think that audiences are starting to like, I don't know if desensitize is the right word. Like they're starting to look at these movies as like TV movies in terms of like, I only want to watch this at home because it might be a whatever distraction. I think like this movie is it's too airless. The action, the effects, the CGI, Kingsman: The Secret Service looks 10 times better than this movie. And it came out not nearly a decade ago. It came out a decade ago and it looks better. And to me, that's wild because this movie, I think, is just extremely ugly and it has a $200 million budget. It has double the budget of Kingsman: The Secret Service. Not only that, they knew that this movie was coming out at a time where it could clean up at the box office because there's not much out. I've had so many conversations with people who are like, I don't know what to watch in theaters right now. I've seen the Oscar stuff, but there's really nothing playing. What do I do? And I'm like, well, you could see Argyle if you have 2.5 hours. But I mean, I think people are looking at a movie like Argyle and they'll be like, why would I see that in a theater? What? No. And it's wild because the marketing for this movie has been everywhere. The trailers have been everywhere. People know this movie exists and they're still saying no to it. So to what you're saying, I agree with you. Throwback premise. But here's the wild thing about it, Will. I do think I don't hate this movie. I actually kind of like it a little bit. A little bit.
Well,
I kind of like this movie past the point where it just changes everything up.
I mean, I thought it was going to be a little bit more positive than you, actually. I don't like the movie, but I was expecting to hate it just because the trailer, like you said, it was so omnipresent and it was just so annoying. And it just felt, the more you saw it, the more grating it was. And it just felt like too cute, too ironic, too like you said, airless. That's a really good word for like, what if it just felt
literally
like there
the punches are like hitting air. Like that's all I see when I think of this movie.
Yeah, it just kind of just felt like like I said before, it just kind of felt like we're past this. Like, why do we need this? But then, like, when you're watching it, like the beginning of the film, like I can't say it's like a successful parody of obviously, but it's like at least it's like kind of like a amusing kind of premise. Like Dua Lipa's looking great, Henry Cavill and John Cena are looking suave and buff, and it feels like it's playing into Matthew Vaughn's hand a little bit better. And it seems like, I don't know, like a movie that would have taken place in like an adaptation of this book by Matthew Vaughn. I know this book doesn't really exist outside the purpose of this film, but like the book in the movie would have been a better, I guess, vehicle for Matthew Vaughn than the thing that Matthew Vaughn actually made, just because it seems like Matthew Vaughn can't really balance the like tone, like the airlessness that comes into the parody and satire elements. There's not a counterbalance with that when we get into like the real world stuff. So like when it becomes a spy thing, it doesn't feel like the tone. I don't know, it doesn't feel like a change. It just kind of feels like more of the same. You know what I mean? Like it doesn't really feel like it captures that balance. It feels like Matthew Vaughn has just been kind of, I don't want to say broken, but it just feels like making these sort of quippy, cutesy movies for like 10 years has kind of inhibited him from quite capturing what this film needs to be ultimately.
Yeah, there are two movies he cites as the kind of movies that really inspired him to do what he did with this movie, and they're Die Hard and Lethal Weapon. And funny enough, I mentioned Lethal Weapon in my review. I thought of Lethal Weapon a bunch during the movie because of like the sort of, there was this kind of quality to it in terms of like, oh, I see that he's trying to do like a buddy action thing with Sam Rockwell and Bryce Dallas Howard.
I thought
it kind of evolves as it goes along.
I thought it was going to be more like Romance in Stone or something would have been like the influence. Or,
that was more the Lost City, right?
Yeah, sure. But I don't know. I feel like this movie and Lost City are not that different to me.
Well, they're not that different in terms of what they are, but I do think they have very different sort of vibes, I guess. Now, my thing with this movie is that like, okay, so we go from like the cheeky, cheesy, whatever spy thing in her head, and now we're going to go to like, okay, but what's like the spy movie of a spy thing in this version of reality where like Ellie Conway's into the action. And for the most part, it's like just as stupid and illogical. And so like, I'm kind of watching it. I'm like, well, what's
right.
like so like, I felt like the hood was kind of like, thrown over my eyes or something, or the wool that's thrown over, whatever that expression.
Yeah, that's what I mean though. It's like, I feel like the beginning, it's like fine for what it is. But like, if somehow Matthew Vaughn could have gone back to sort of that layered grittiness that's stylish, but kind of more layered grittiness of like layer cake for like the scenes with like Sam Rockwell, it would have made like more of a kind of a stark impression. But I don't know, it just kind of feels like every scene sort of has the same sort of listless feel to it. Like it's
but see,
like,
that's what saves the movie for me, is that like once it starts getting into that place, I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm not liking this. Then it was like, now we're going to be a totally different movie. And I'm like, sure, well, that sounds great to me, because I wasn't really enjoying that. I think like as it went along and it kept getting even more ridiculous, I was like, at least the energy of it is starting to be more consistent. And I know people like with the twist are groaning their faces off. I didn't hate the twist. I actually was like, that's just stupid enough for me to buy in. And once they go through it too, I'm like, oh, heck yes. This is just operating on a so bad it's good level for me that I gave the movie a pass. I was like, you know what? I didn't hate the experience. The only thing I hated about it was that it just was too long. It kept going. And also just the meta stuff around it. I'm just like, just be standalone. Maybe, like I said this in my review, maybe it is possible for a movie to have too many twists. I think it is, because they just kept going with it. And I was just like, wait, what? The heart and the bullet, like, stop. Like, just end the movie. Like, we don't have to keep doing this.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to say like I had like a roller coaster of emotions, because like I was pretty, I would say stoic, I guess, throughout. Like I was just kind of just along
you're a bit of a Henry
ride.
Cavill during this thing.
Yeah, I was just kind of just like, but like at the beginning, I'm like, okay, you know, like when it's the, you know, like the book within the book, or the book within the movie, or whatever, when I call it movie within a movie, I was kind of with it. Like I said, I kind of enjoyed in an amused sort of way, like the over the top, you know, spy parody. It felt like in Matthew Vaughn's vein, when it was just, you know, with Bryce Dallas Howard and like Catherine O'Hara, I just wasn't really, I was kind of back to like, okay, this seems drawn out, kind of cliche. I know where this is going. But then Sam Rockwell gets into it, and I'm like, okay, this is like a perfect vehicle for Sam Rockwell. It's entirely relying on his charms. It feels like the type of role we haven't seen from Sam Rockwell, like since he's kind of gotten more prestige credit, and like, you know, since Three Billboards Outside of Ebbing, Missouri. It's like, you know, it's more springy, and he's
kind
of
reminds
me
like when he did that movie with Anna Kendrick, you know, what was it called?
The
Right
Max
Guy.
Landis one. Yeah. It does have a similar vibe to that Max Landis film. I guess it's slightly better, but I don't know what that really says. But you know, it
Mr.
just allows
Right?
him to.
What was it called?
Something like that. Who cares? But you know, like it allows him to dance, and he's, you know, like it seems like he's kind of having, I don't want to say like fun, but he's like, you know, he's getting something out of it, I guess it seems like. And then you get like all these stars, a lot of people I like Bryan Cranston and Sam Rockwell Samuel L. Jackson's what I meant to say. And
can I just say, Samuel L. Jackson and Sofia Boutella, it seemed to be in this movie as a favor, like a personal favor to Matthew Vaughn, because there's no need for these actors. Like, these actors are like shot in one location, basically. And I'm like, oh, because you were in other things. Yeah. Because that's the thing, isn't it? That like this is supposed to be in the Kingsman universe. And I guess we're just doing that thing where like, okay, they just look very much like these other Kingsman characters.
Right.
They could not possibly be, but whatever, that's fine.
But anyway, I mean, when it's just, you know, when it's Bryce Dallas Howard and Sam Rockwell together, I was like, I was agreeable with it, I guess. Like they don't have like amazing chemistry, but they play well together, I guess.
I would say they have zero chemistry. I think almost negative chemistry. I did not buy them as like a romantic thing at all. I don't buy them. Where I was like, oh, the movie's not going to do that. I was like, perfect.
Sure. I agree. And so it's like, I don't buy them as romantic partners, as like kind of embittered, like, well, we got to do this sort of thing.
That's what, the buddy comedy part of it. I was like, yes, like the sort of like, he's like roping her along. Like, it was so platonic to me. And the movie does kind of have its own explanation for that eventually, to its credit. Like it does kind of have a reason for why there isn't really romantic chemistry there. But do we just want to spoil this movie at this point? Do we need to keep belaboring it?
We're like 45 minutes into this, and we already spent like 12 of those minutes talking about Malcolm Gladwell. So if anyone's still listening and doesn't care about spoilers, I have to commend them at this point.
Because there are so many things that happen in this movie that I'm just like, do you ever have moments when you're watching a movie where you're like, that's so stupid, I'm out? Like, I do not, you know, this happens to me a lot with like the DCEU, like early on, and I just get mad at the movie.
I don't know. I feel like it's more like like something like Last Night in Soho, where it's like I buy it when it's like a certain vibe, but then like when that vibe changes and it's just kind of like flimsier and like the movie doesn't like, you know, it doesn't have the stakes it had before, that's when I kind of check out, I guess.
Yeah. Checking out is the perfect way to put it. This movie, I never had that moment with this movie. I think that I just went along with it. And I know a lot of other critics couldn't do it. And I get it. But for me, I think there's just something about like the Catherine O'Hara performance in this. Even like there's some actors in here who I think aren't in this enough. And I got the sense that like, okay, you got John Cena and Ariana DeBose only because there's going to be other movies. Because like they don't really do anything here. Really, like Henry Cavill gets to do a lot to his credit. And Bryan Cranston gets a lot to do here. Catherine O'Hara gets a lot to do here. So I'm not complaining necessarily because I think that core cast is definitely like integral to the movie and it doesn't, you know, overly meander or whatever. But I don't know. That brings me to my main thing, which is when all these twists are happening and the movie is kind of losing its footing in certain spots, what kind of pulls me through here is Bryce Dallas Howard. I think she's actually like pretty decent in this. And I cared about her as a character. I found her interesting and I bought it. Like, I think she just kind of sold it really well. I think it was just plain good acting. And I think that balanced with Sam Rockwell also just always being lots of fun, even in like kind of a bit role that isn't written super well. He still has so much charm to him that like I was having fun watching these two characters do stupid stuff. And so by the end of the movie, I was like, you know what? I liked watching them do stupid stuff. We got two like sort of quasi Kingsman action sequences out of the movie that were pretty memorable, terrible CGI, but they were just, again, stupid. But like, I can enjoy stupid things. I can enjoy ice skating on crude oil. Why not? Nobody else has done it. Like, to me, that was Matthew Vaughn just being like, well, I want to have an action set piece that hasn't been done before. And I can respect that.
I will say, I mean, it was nice to just see Bryce Dallas. I know she's done like the Jurassic World movies recently, but those kind of feel more like, I don't know, like the last two kind of felt like she was there because she signed a contract. You know what I mean? Like it didn't feel like, you know, not that she gave a bad performance, but it didn't feel like she was like,
she wasn't quite the lead, you know, like she kind of like, she's definitely one of the leads, but I think those movies are like, and they worship Chris Pratt.
Sure. But what I was going to say though is I was under the impression that Bryce Dallas Howard was kind of moving away from acting. Maybe she is, but like, I know like she's like, she directed like an Apple documentary, Apple TV. I mean, like, I know she's like done some episodes with the Star Wars series.
Good stuff with Star Wars. Like she's in recognition for like, she did like one of the only good episodes of the Book of Boba Fett. And she did like a few like really good episodes of The Mandalorian.
So I just kind of assumed that she was kind of following her like dad's footsteps and just kind of moving.
She still is.
Directing.
She's directing stuff from the Star Wars Skeleton Crew show that's going to be coming out this year. Like she's still on it, and that's John Watts too. Like that's looking to be getting some hype.
But in any case, I think initially I was just kind of, it was like a warm kind of pleasant feeling for me to be like, oh, like Bryce Dallas Howard has like an actual lead role again where she's like required to act. It was like, I didn't think I'd get one of these for a little bit. But then like for me, I don't know, and this is probably an inappropriate comparison, but like I kind of got like a Willie Scott vibe from the way that her character is written at times. You know what I mean? Where it just kind of felt like they were trying, like, I know Matthew Vaughn has issues, I'll say politely, with how he portrays women in his films.
Yes.
But like,
I think that is more than fair, yeah.
It just kind of felt like this character felt like the parody of the sort of like 2014 Tumblr neurotic like woman. And like, you know, it's like, I just kind of felt very like, I don't know, just cliched and like kind of degrading for an actress like Bryce Dallas Howard. But like, I think, like I said, like, I think not romantically, but platonically, I think she plays well with Sam Rockwell. And I think just his chemistry alone was really kind of helping, not to salvage it, but like make it more palatable. And I think, you know, like the movie, to its credit, I think tries to rectify that in the later half, as far as like not making this character as passive or as like, you know, complaining or as
well, like, there's whiny. Even in the early stuff, like she kind of goes along with the adventure. Like she's not the constant reluctant hero or heroine or whatever. She's kind of like, oh, I have an idea. Like I could figure this out, or like try. You know, she does. I think a lot of that too comes from Howard, who is herself a director. And I think I can't even imagine, like, I don't think this happened. I don't really credit Vaughn much, is what I'm saying. with the characterization that we do get. I think Howard probably had a strong hand. I've heard some rumors that she kind of pushed back against certain things that happened in the movie to the film's credit. But at the same time, I think I agree with you that like certain ways that she's written do feel very much like, yeah, a guy wrote that. Like, and it kind of shows. Not that guys can't write female characters, obviously, but like, you got to do it well. You know, the women have to write male characters well too, but that requires a lot of empathy and self-awareness and all that stuff.
But in any case, I don't know. I guess to your point, I guess I was willing to indulge this film to a point. And it's not to say I checked out at any point, but it was just more like, if this was just and I know like a film can be however long it wants to be. And you know, I love a movie like Killers of the Flower Moon that it's like 3.5 hours. And Beau Was Afraid that's like just purely indulgent, 3 hours as well. But like this movie really needed to be like 105 minutes. Like at 2+ hours, like a trifle like this can't sustain itself for like over 2 hours. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's just like,
yeah.
Like, and the sad thing is like towards the end, it feels like
the stakes need to be big enough for 2.5 hours, right?
Well,
the stakes in this movie don't match that. That's the problem with doing a super long comedy action.
Sure. But like the sad thing is that, like the end of the film feels like where Vaughn's actually getting more inspired and like more visually, like there's a scene involving like smoke. What do you call it? Like the flares, like the, you know, like it's like pure Vaughn. Like it's actually a pretty fun, like totally over the top, but like goofy in the right sort of way, Matthew Vaughn sequence. It's like, if this was the climax of the movie, I think I'd be fine with it and maybe even like give it a light, like 6 out of 10 or whatever. But like, it just keeps going on and on after that. Yeah. It's just like, I just kind of want this to wrap up. Like, you know,
I didn't realize that they were using the like AI Beatles song at a certain point now and then.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that was that.
I thought that was so funny because it's just like, oh yes, this is our song. Like, oh yes, a song that came out 3 months before the movie came out. Yes.
Yeah, so apparently this movie takes place like years and years from now, huh? Yeah, no, I can't be mad at this movie. This movie is like, if this movie was like my kid, you know, I'm always gonna be proud of my kid. Like, even though they say the darndest things, this movie cost $200 million to make, and so far it's made only around 39.5 million at the box office. It's gonna be a flop. I think it would have to earn at least like 400 to 500 million to just break even. Like, based on the marketing that they put into this thing, it's a disaster. We have Dune Part 2 coming out soon. We're only like 2 weeks away from that, and that's March 1st. And Madam Web is about to come out, which, I mean, I'm not expecting Madam Web to, you know, be much of a box office darling or anything, but like there's other things coming out.
Yeah, there's like Lisa Frankenstein. Is that going to do well? I have no idea, but
I don't know. The reviews haven't been very good for Lisa Frankenstein, which I'm sad to hear.
Is that our next review, by the way? Or are we just going to go do the end of the year 2023 thing?
I don't think we can. Yeah, we still have to do our best movies of the year episode. So that I think we'll have to figure it out in post. But this movie, it's just, I'm a little bit sad that the movie isn't taken off, but at the same time, like, yeah, it doesn't deserve to. It just, most of the reviews I've seen from this have been very negative. We'll do the Rotten Tomatoes game and everything, but here's just one. This is from Riley. Riley said, one of the worst films ever made, but also one of the most perplexing, like Alan Wake 2 / Matrix Resurrections for your bozo workmate. Floored by how much of this turns into a needlessly dense multi-format meta text for the most brain-dead content ever conceived. I'm having a stroke trying to parse together any minor detail. It's like when you first watch The Return, and any question raised only leads to an endless abyss of questions. What part of this is real? Who is Argyle? Is Argyle real? Am I Argyle? Are we all Argyle? Is Argyle behind the Matthew Vaughn cinematic oeuvre? I don't know if I say that wrong. Every moment of this made me physically nauseous, but I will never not be thinking about this again. At the 2-hour mark, I generally felt like I had unlocked new levels of brain rot I never thought possible, like I was the Paul Atreides of stupid. Am I Argyle? And like, this is the vibe of a lot of the reviews I've come across from people who are just like, to me, it's like, the movie ain't that. It's not that. You're just having fun, and I hope you're having fun.
Yeah, I mean, well, it's totally fascinating to compare this to Twin Peaks: The Return, but but no, I don't know. Like I said, I think it's less to do with the movie. I think it's just that people's, like, it just came out the exact wrong time. Like, in the way that, like, Kick-Ass and Kingsman came out the exact right time. Like, it's just, I think it's less the movie is like egregiously terrible. And I think it's more just people are kind of fed up with this sort of thing.
Yeah.
And it's just that, like, I think, people got annoyed by the trailers for obvious reasons. I think they just, like, it. And the thing is, like, the movie itself isn't even as annoying as the trailers. Like, it looks way more grating in the promotional materials in the film. Like, the movie itself is almost more lethargic than like, like overly, like, witty and snappy and all that to me. Like, it felt a little more like ho-hum as I was watching it. But yeah, I don't know. I think that's the big thing, is that just people are just kind of sick of this type of thing. And it's just a very easy, big target. And it's just like, they're all just kind of directing their frustrations with this whole thing at this movie, because it's the thing that's, the big, bright bullseye mark that they can attack on. And it's like, it doesn't not deserve it because it's a pretty mediocre movie. But like, I also kind of feel like people are getting like ridiculous in how much they're lambasting this movie.
I have seen some people be like, Apple Original Films is like, between this and Ghosted and stuff. And I'm like, I guess, but I mean, they still have some pretty good stuff under their belt. They had Killers of the Flower Moon, Apple Original Films was part of. Napoleon is definitely an example. Like, yeah, between this Napoleon and The Family Plan, like it's been a few sort of like misses there, but you still have like, and also the Beanie Bubble. Can't forget about the Beanie Bubble. But I think Tetris did well. Sharper got plenty of acclaim. Spirited, I think people liked more than they expected. Causeway. There's still, I think that there's still this sort of like, when's the next coda, I guess, which is going to be, I guess Killers of the Flower Moon is close to that. I don't know how you would, just in terms of like a critical, like mainstream hit, I guess. But because Tragedy of Macbeth was a critically successful,
mm-hmm.
Cha-Cha Real Smooth, critics like that too.
I guess so. I would say, look, I'm going to say that Napoleon is a bigger success than Cha-Cha Real Smooth, but that's just me.
Sure.
But
with critics though,
both, I'd say.
There's 2 Apple Original Films coming out this year, and I'm not really talking about documentaries. If we're talking about documentaries, I mean, I think there's been great stuff coming from Apple Original, which I would say like Still last year was really great. I still think the Velvet Underground documentary just like blew me away. Really loved it. I liked the Billie Eilish one. Boy State was good. I know they're going to do Girl State soon, but yeah, back and Beastie Boys Story. I think we both like that. And also, Bryce Dallas Howard did the documentary with Apple Original.
Yeah,
I
think I mentioned. Yeah.
You mentioned she did a doc. Yeah. Dads.
Yeah, Dads.
Yeah.
I was gonna joke with Girl Say it's like these dang gender reboots.
Wow. But no, in terms of narrative films, Project Artemis is going to be coming out in the summer, and that's going to be another like kind of rom-com, and it's like a Greg Berlanti thing. So it's Scarlett Johansson, Channing Tatum, Jim Rash, Ray Romano, and Woody Harrelson.
Ooh, I like Ray Romano.
But I have a bad feeling about it. And then Wolves, which is another John Watts thing. So John Watts, we were just talking about, but that's George Clooney and Brad Pitt co-producing and starring.
Yeah, I heard about that one. Yeah.
So anyway, just wanted to kind of bring up the Apple Original Films aspect of this, because I do wonder if Matthew Vaughn is going to do more things with Apple Original or not. Who knows?
All I know is it's not going to involve that Argyle.
Yeah, I would be surprised. I could sort of see like maybe nods and winks at Argyle, like if he does another Kingsman sort of thing, but I don't think that they're going to, I think if they do something else, it's going to be like a totally like new debut, like, oh yeah, this is its own thing. It's not called Argyle or whatever. So
honestly, if in the 4th Kingsman movie, like they just have an opening scene where like Argyle is going to some like Arabian club or something and just instantly gets like a bullet to the head, and it's just like that's like the way they like dispose. It doesn't even make sense.
That'd be
like,
funny. That'd be funny.
It doesn't even make sense because it's like 1980s or whatever, and it's just like the way of Matthew Vaughn being like, you guys didn't love Argyle, so there you go, and just like, has a pout. I'd kind of respect the audacity of something like that, but I don't think that's what's going to happen, but we'll see.
And after all this, I think that like I'm just going to wake up one day and someone's going to be like, the latest, the sequel, Dune Part 3 with screenwriter Jason Fuchs, or it's going to be Oppenheimer 2 with Jason Fuchs, the screenwriter, because this guy can't be stopped.
Wonka 2, I guess. Let's play that Rotten Tomatoes game.
Well,
Let's wrap this up.
Yeah, well, I did have one other. I had a more positive thing. This is from Benji Got Fried, who said, "I have been waiting since 2021 for this after seeing the first poster, and I can happily say my expectations succeeded." I think they mean exceeded. They really did a great job promoting this movie. Everything with this movie was very interesting because you didn't know what was or wasn't real.
No.
The plot twists were way better than I thought they would be. The comedy was great. The action set pieces were all done well and were very entertaining. The cast is absolutely stacked. Henry Cavill is great as Argyle. Dua Lipa was an absolute delight to watch for the amount of screen time she had. Samuel L. Jackson does what he does best, and Bryan Cranston is legendary as always. Our two leads, Sam Rockwell and Bryce Dallas Howard, have really good chemistry with each other and have very interesting stories. The issues I had with this movie, the pacing felt off at certain times, and they certainly could have cut out 15 minutes of screen time. This is definitely a huge win for Matthew Vaughn. He did exactly what he wanted to do, and it all went well. I would definitely recommend this movie, but this definitely isn't for everyone. I can't wait to see everyone's reaction to the Agent Argyle reveal. Bless this person. I kind of wonder if this is a sarcastic review.
Or maybe a plant.
I don't know. I don't think so, but I do think it's kind of funny.
I'm genuinely kind of wonder, though, at this point, like, because Hollywood's wise to letterbox at this point. At some point, they're going to have to, if they're not already going to be putting like plant reviews, right? Like, kind of the way that, like they try to buff up the audience score for, like Rotten Tomatoes and stuff. I kind of wonder if they're going to just like have like, some intern, right? Like Argyle, 5 stars. But I do love the idea of succeeding expectations in a sense of just like,
yes. In the wake of Texas, no less.
Right. Yeah.
But yes, Rotten Tomatoes game.
Yeah.
248 reviews counted. What do the critics have to say about this one? So, Will Ashton, what do you think the Rotten Tomatoes score is, or were you spoiled on it? I think you said you were, but
no, the only one I was spoiled on was the cinema score, which I know is a C+. So that's the only thing I know going into this.
I heard about that as well. But okay, what do you think? What's your guess?
So I can't imagine the reviews are good, just based on everything. So I'm going to have to say that the critic score is like 38%.
It was 38 at one point, and it kind of moved up and down the 30s for a while. When I logged my review, I think it was like at 37. Later on, I think it started to settle at 34. Now it's at 33. And so it fittingly, the Jesus year, my age. But what about the audience score, Will? We have 1,000+ verified ratings. Do you think audiences are a little nicer or a little meaner?
Much like Jesus, Argyle had to die for our cinematic sins.
You would just say our sins, but with a C.
Yeah. Our cinema sins, if you will.
Sure.
There you go. You get it? Anyhow, audience score, it has to be a little bit more positive than critics, but I can't imagine, I don't know, like, I don't know many people who have seen this movie in person. And it doesn't seem like the reviews or reactions I've seen from anybody, critic or otherwise, has been more than lukewarm at best. So I'm going to say this is probably like a 45% for audience scores.
71%.
Well, yeah. I'll be dang.
Audiences, I do think audiences are a little bit like, yeah, okay, this thing has got some issues, but I liked it enough. I think that's the vibe I'm kind of getting from the consensus there. And honestly, like there are some critics who like really liked this movie. So, shout out to them. They're having fun. But okay, so you already mentioned the C+ cinema score. We'll finish out with the letterbox rating. And I do wonder if you're going to get this. So 67,000 watches, which more than I expected. But what do you think, Will Ashton? What do you think the average rating is on Letterboxd?
Is it like 2.7?
So close, 2.5. Well done.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, a little lower than that, which I definitely would have probably guessed around. And just when I was like looking through the like popular reviews, I mean, 1 star, 1 star, 1 star, 2 star. It's just people are having a reaction to this one. I think this is definitely like a stoned, like, so like, let's watch a bad movie together kind of thing for some people.
Sure. I mean, I was curious. I mean, you allowed me the chance to not watch it, but I was seeing so many egregiously like, wildly negative pans. I was like, well, I'm just kind of curious now. Like, what's the deal with this movie?
I'm surprised because I didn't think you would want to see it. I think you were sort of like, I don't know. You didn't watch Kingsman, I should say. And you didn't like the Golden Circle as much, but yeah, you saw Argyle. But that'll do it for this week's episode of Cinemaholics. I think our plan is to do like our next thing should be our top movies of the year. I think we have delayed it enough. I don't want to get into March and we haven't done it yet.
Sure.
But have you seen everything that you wanted? I know there's at least one Oscar movie you weren't sure you were going to be able to see yet, but Robot Dreams.
Yeah, I would like to see that if I can, but
Show must go on.
What was it?
The show must go on.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing is like there are always movies I want to see before the end of the year list, but at some point you just kind of have to, be like, this is my list for the episode. This is my little time capsule for what I thought were the best movies of the year. But I will say, at least for now, I feel like I'm more confident in at least like my top 8 than I am usually when I put together these lists. So
that's exciting.
So yeah, we'll see what happens.
I think I'm the opposite, but this is definitely my weirdest top 10 we've ever done, just in terms of like where I'm at with some of these movies. But yeah, all right. Well, we'll see you all again later. From the Internet California, I'm John Negroni.
And from the Internet Pennsylvania, I'm Agent Ashton.
See you next time.
Shaken, not stirred.